Billionaire CEO came home without warning and froze when she saw what the janitor was doing. She had signed contracts worth more than the GDP of small countries. She'd flung down gauntlets in rooms full of men twice her age and watched them step back. But the night she came home without warning, the thing that stopped her cold wasn't a threat, a thief, or a scandal. It was a lullaby. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The uninvited return. The limousine's engine exhaled as it rolled to a stop at the edge of the circular drive. Midnight had poured its ink across the Hudson, leaving the glass mansion Vanessa Lair called home gleaming like a jewel cut out of the darkness. She had told her office, her entire world, that she would remain in Singapore for the week. That was the plan until the last negotiation ended and the adrenaline drained out of her veins, leaving a hollow ache she didn't have a name for. She canceled the rest of the trip, didn't tell a soul. Vanessa stepped onto the marble and felt the cold press through her stockings like an accusation. She moved through the foyer with her shoes in her hand by habit, a training from an old apartment where every squeak gave something away. The house was dark save for a soft, steady glow from the west wing, the lounge where the Persian rug lay, the one her grandmother had pressed into her arms with a wrinkled smile. For good luck, darling, for memory. It had been years since luck felt like something she needed. Memory, she'd made a career of outrunning it. The sound reached her first, not the brushed hush of janitorial mops or the quiet churn of the security system, but music, thin, imperfect, raw, vinyl. And not the swelling strings she kept for galas, the symphonies that matched the sweep of the city. This was smaller and quieter. A French lullaby, the kind children hold for comfort the way grown-ups hold secrets. Vanessa's spine prickled. Her mind ran calculations, precautions, breach protocols. Her body moved like a shadow. She drifted toward the sound, across the marble and into the lounge. And there, on the Persian rug, everything she thought she knew about loyalty, love, and herself dissolved like fog. Elias stood on the rug, slow and steady, a middle-aged, soft-spoken man whose presence had always been the absence in a room, the man who kept the corners dustless while wars were waged upstairs. Elias the janitor, whose last name she'd never bothered to learn, who nodded when she passed and made himself invisible when she spoke. He didn't see her now. He was swaying to the faint scratch of the record, humming along. In his arms lay a little girl in a faded pink dress, her cheek pressed to his chest. He held her as if she were the most breakable thing in the world. His eyes were closed. His hand, large and rough, stroked the child's hair. If the word tenderness had a posture, it would look like this. Vanessa stopped at the threshold. She didn't move. She couldn't. When Elias finally turned, his mouth dropped open. His knees almost gave. He gathered himself and laid the sleeping girl gently on the sofa. Tucking the blanket around her, he looked up at the woman whose name could make a market tremble. "Miss Lair," he whispered, voice shaking. I didn't know you were, I can explain." Her voice, when it came, was frost clean and sharp. "Explain." He glanced down at the girl. "She's my granddaughter, Sophie." Vanessa took one step closer. Sophie's lashes lay like brushstrokes against her cheek. "Why is she in my house?" Vanessa asked. "At midnight." Elias swallowed. His eyes shone and didn't spill. "Her mother, my daughter Anais, passed away last month. Cancer, the bills." He exhaled like a balloon that had been inflated with grief. "We lost the house last week. I didn't have anywhere to go. I kept her in the maintenance room, just until I could find something. I swear I kept the upstairs WR untouched. I cleaned more, not less. Tonight she couldn't sleep. The room downstairs is cold. She wakes and calls for her mother. I brought her up here to dance. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Vanessa's world had always been held together by contracts, timetables, rules, the clean edges of inevitability. Nothing about this would fit into a policy binder. She should have been furious. She was supposed to be furious. Instead, something else broke open inside her like a window that hadn't been opened in years. A scent she had forgotten drifted in. When she was 5, her father lost his job at the paper, and then the apartment. For 3 weeks they slept in an attic above a small office building, the attic of the janitor who mopped those nights and whistled without thinking about it. Mr. Browsard, her mother had whispered against the dark, God bless him. She had learned what dignity smelled like in that attic, detergent and coffee, hope and dust. The memory was a small, warm creature, and she'd been pretending it had died. It hadn't. She looked at Sophie. The child shifted and made a small sound, a bird sound. Vanessa felt something crash inside her ribcage, a shelf falling. She nodded once at Elias. "You'll both sleep here tonight," she said. "On beds, not on couches. Tomorrow we talk." Elias opened his mouth, a protest that was gratitude trying to be born, but the words wouldn't come. He nodded. He sat on the floor beside the sofa, his back to the wall like a guard. He kept watching the sleeping child. He didn't look away even when Vanessa left the room, though he heard her bare steps whisper across the marble, heard the door close somewhere in the house like a sigh. Vanessa did not sleep. She sat in the hallway and watched the rise and fall of a chest the size of both her hands. She watched the luminous pulse of the record player's red eye until the vinyl stopped, and the needle clicked restlessly at the edge of silence. In a house bought by victory after victory, now the only thing that mattered wasn't hers. She didn't move for a long time. Chapter 2, Guest Suite with morning light at dawn, the sky spilled apricot over the Hudson. Elias rose stiffly from the floor and reached for the child. He was ready to go. He'd be humble, he'd be thankful, he'd be gone. He had done what he'd set out to do. Sophie had slept. He could face another day. They were halfway to the front door when Vanessa's voice knifed across the hall. "Where do you think you're going?" Elias turned. Vanessa stood on the patio, robe wrapped around her, coffee held in a hand that didn't tremble. Her hair was pulled into a bun that looked accidental. Her face was drained, not with anger, but with the thinnest sleep. "I thought you'd want us gone," he said. His eyes flickered to the child, then back to his employer. "Your granddaughter's name?" Vanessa asked, ignoring his assumption. "Sophie," he said. "She turned 4 in June." Vanessa nodded like she was weighing numbers on a scale. "The guest suite downstairs," she said. "It has morning light, fresh linen, a private bath, and a door that locks. You'll both be in there by noon. You, Elias, will stop sleeping in the maintenance room like a man hiding from his own life. You'll be on salary, not janitorial." She took a sip of her coffee. "Full-time caretaker for this house and for Sophie." The words fell into the air between them. Elias's mouth opened and closed like he was pulling up rope from a well that had no end. "Miss Lair, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay." Vanessa's eyes did not leave Sophie's face. Sophie peered from behind her grandfather's leg, finger in mouth, curiosity rising like sunrise. She watched Vanessa watch her, and then she tilted her head. "We can stay." Vanessa felt something dangerous. She smiled a small smile that made her own face strange to her. "You can stay." Elias lowered his head. His shoulders softened. He blinked hard. Somewhere in his chest, something uncurled its hands around his heart. They moved into the guest suite by noon. The house, which had held years of silence and victory and no mess, began to breathe. Sophie's giggles echoed up staircases that had only ever carried the click of heels and the sliding hush of expensive fabric. Crayon drawings began appearing on the fridge. A stuffed rabbit wound up on the piano bench. The smell of bleach and lemon was joined by mornings of vanilla and cinnamon and the shock of strawberries when the grocery service arrived. Vanessa's assistant, startled, added children's toothbrush to a list without asking questions. Vanessa returned from the office earlier than her driver believed possible. She took late calls from the lounge and listened to the odd duet of CFO forecasts and the recorder notes of a little girl testing out an instrument somebody delivered because somebody wanted to do more than survive. It made no sense, and all the sense. It was lunacy and logic kissing. Chapter 3, Names We Carry. One night, a week after the uninvited return, Vanessa found Sophie crouched on the Persian rug, her small fingers tugging at a frayed edge. "Careful," Vanessa said reflexively. "That was my grandmother's." Sophie paused, eyes round, seriousness like the onset of a storm. "It has a note," she said, and then, because she was 4 and the truth meant what it sounded like to her, she added, "A paper is hiding." Vanessa knelt. Sure enough, the warp of the rug had loosened, and a thin corner of paper peeked like a shy child from the underside. She slipped her nail into the opening and coaxed it free. The paper was stained with time. The handwriting sang through the years, her grandmother's. She knew those looping elquotests from old recipes. She read aloud in a voice she didn't recognize. "When you have more than you need, build a longer table, not a higher fence. Remember, Vanessa, we were sheltered once in a stranger's attic. Someday it will be your turn. Love, Mame." The world tilted. The rug, the attic, the janitor's whistle, the climate of her childhood shifted, and the air she'd been breathing like oxygen broke her open with its honesty. She swallowed, put the note in her pocket, and looked at Sophie, whose eyes were studying her almost scientifically. "Can I draw on the back?" Sophie asked. Vanessa laughed. It came out like a cough surprised to be joy. "No, we'll keep this one." That night, when Sophie had fallen asleep and Elias stood like a guard at her door, Vanessa brought the note to the kitchen. "Does the name Brousard mean anything to you?" she asked quietly. Elias's back stiffened, then softened. He gestured at a chair. "My father was Henry Brousard," he said. "He mopped floors at a small shipping office on Canal. When I was a boy, he kept a spare mattress in the attic for nights when someone had nowhere to go. He'd say, 'What is a roof good for if not to keep more than one head dry?'" Vanessa sank into the chair as if somebody had taken the structure out of her and left a person who needed furniture to stand. "He sheltered my family," she said, "after my father lost his job." Elias's eyes flicked to the note she was holding and then to her face. "I know," he said. She blinked. "You knew how?" He shrugged, almost embarrassed. "When I took the job here 7 years ago, I knew your name. Lair, not common. The timing fit. Your face reminded me of a little girl who borrowed my mother's scarf to be a queen the night she slept in our attic." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't say anything. My father taught me not to turn kindness into currency. If you ever recognized me, that would be grace enough." Vanessa felt humiliation, not because of what he had said, but because she hadn't seen him. Not really. For 7 years, this man had glided along her periphery like a secret she mistook for a shadow. For 7 years, he had carried her story and let her tell a different one. She closed her eyes and put 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose, as if she could pinch reality like fabric to move it into a better shape. "My mother used to say there are 2 kinds of wealth," Vanessa murmured, "money and memory." She slipped the note back into her pocket. "We hit the first one. We buried the second. Maybe it's time to dig." Elias said nothing. He didn't need to. Chapter 4, The Mansion Learns a Language. Finding Sophie meant finding patterns. She liked the record player because it clicked at the end and she could put the needle back. She liked oranges more than apples. She hated thunder but loved rain. She needed her mother with a hunger that reality could not appease. Vanessa was not fluent in this language, but she learned. She learned that the corners in her house were shadows where monsters could hide, unless a night light was placed in them like a lighthouse. She learned that chicken nuggets were edible, even if you owned a personal chef. She learned that a CEO could sit cross-legged on a rug at noon and cut paper crowns, and still have time to chair a board meeting at 2 if the board would stop calling her at 7 in the morning to ask where she was. She also learned that love did not respect office hours. At work, change arrived with the weight of attention. People didn't know what to call the thing that was happening to their boss. She had never been soft, and she wasn't now, not where it mattered: returns, deadlines, strategy. But there was a new lightness to the way she walked into a room. She joked once. She asked an assistant if she had eaten lunch, and when the assistant said no, Vanessa stared at her until she stood and walked out to get food. She came back with a salad and a strange look on her face like she'd seen a ghost in a mirror. Her CFO, Ethan Cole, watched everything and said nothing. He was a man built of numbers and their razor edges. He didn't believe in luck, he believed in information and leverage. "It's a phase," he said in a voice thick with calm. "Every glacier calves." Margot Stein, the coup, who had seen more women try to hold on to humanity in the storm than she cared to count, watched with the narrowed eyes of someone timed to tragedy. "And every calving changes the tide," she countered. "Careful," Ethan smiled. "Don't mix metaphors with balance sheets." Margot's gaze didn't flinch. "We're not the kind of company that eats its young and calls it strategy, Ethan. Not anymore. We're the kind of company that returns 15%, Ethan said, and left the room. Vanessa ignored them in the way you ignore thunder you choose to love. She was too busy building a longer table. She started small. She doubled the child care benefit for staff without calling it a PR piece. She sent a memo insisting that any promotion cycle include a line item for training the people left behind, so success didn't feel like betrayal to the ones who didn't get plucked. She demanded that every quarterly meeting begin with a story of kindness executed with company dollars, not brand campaigns. Because if we can buy servers that run at the speed of light, we can fund empathy at the speed of now. The stock went up Because sometimes good things happen when you do the right thing and the spreadsheet gods are tired of pretending they're neutral. Chapter 5. The price of softness laughter in a house like hers was contagious and combustible. It set things alight she didn't know were flammable. It also made her enemies smile with their teeth. The gossip blogs nipped like stray dogs at her ankles. One grainy photo of Vanessa holding Sophie's hand in the garden, tall woman, in an uncharacteristically soft cardigan, little girl in a pink dress clutching a stuffed rabbit. And suddenly, the headlines demanded answers to questions not worth asking. Who is Vanessa Lair's secret child? A tabloid screamed as if claiming people erased them. Her PR department filed statements and frowned. Vanessa didn't respond. Let them talk. The truth was plain in the eyes of a man and a child and a note that had spent decades sewn into a rug. Then the leak hit. It was Wednesday morning. The Asia deal she had flown to Singapore for, the one that had ended in a handshake, and a set of terms etched into stone, suddenly appeared on a competitor's desk with her confidential structuring annotated and mocked. The press had it by afternoon. Lair Holdings outmaneuvered. Blunder or betrayal. Ethan Cole strolled into her office at 405, wearing his calm like perfume. "We need to talk about your security," he said. "This house." He didn't say the word like he was going to use it against her later. He saved that for the room where it would count. "Since certain domestic distractions arrived, there's been a slippage in your attention and—" "Watch it, Ethan." Margot's voice cut through before Vanessa could open her mouth. "It's a matter of assets," Ethan said smoothly. "You brought a non-employee into your home, the janitor, with access to everything." He clasped his hands. "Optics, risk, board appetite, you know the language, Vanessa." Vanessa stood, a clean, straight movement. She'd learned the articulation of rage that never bent into petness. "I know it," she said. "And I also know someone in this building is feeding our competitor. I'm less interested in optics than in the math of a mole." "We'll have IT sweep your house," Ethan said, "and the maintenance rooms while we're at it." "Don't go near those," Vanessa's voice lowered. It wasn't threat, it was promise. "Then consider the board summoned," Ethan smiled. "This level of exposure is unacceptable. We'll convene Friday. We'll take a vote." Vanessa watched him leave. She waited until the elevator doors swallowed him, then she looked at Margot. "How bad?" she asked. Margot closed the door. "The leak is identifiable if we're smart," she said. "You run circle drills on your execs the way you run traps on competitors. Canary trap, Vanessa. Give each person a different line of bait. See what shows up in the press. Find the feather that doesn't match the bird." Vanessa exhaled. "I should have done it weeks ago." "You were busy building a home," Margot said. "You're doing both now. You can do both." They ran the trap that afternoon. 3 slightly different term sheets were created, 3 confidential memos watermarked with minuscule syntax shifts, one for Ethan, one for legal, one for the head of strategy. The memos lived on top of a nest of digital tripwires, little strings that would sing if you tugged them. By midnight, the strings began to hum. Chapter 6. The night that almost broke Sophie's fever spiked at 2 in the morning. One moment she was a small moon asleep. The next she was a fire too big for her tiny frame. Elias called out, voice tight. Vanessa was in the doorway before the second syllable. "We're going to the hospital," she said, calm like summer rain. Elias nodded, his hand on the child's forehead, knuckles white. His eyes said 1,000 things the mouth couldn't. They moved like a practiced dance, blanket, water bottle, shoes. The driver startled awake, the car an arrow toward St. Luke's. The city at 3 a.m. was a different animal, and the sirens felt like reminders that life's most important things happen when you're supposed to be asleep. At the ER, Vanessa sat in a plastic chair while a nurse with pink shoes and a steady gaze checked Sophie's vitals, murmured something about a virus, Tylenol, watch the temp. The fever was dangerous only if ignored. They would not ignore it. Vanessa's hand didn't leave Sophie's small one. Her phone vibrated like a polite demon. Board meeting moved up, it read. 8 a.m. Today, no excuses. It was Ethan's assistant's number. Vanessa stared at the ceiling as if the tiles were a chessboard that could speak. She didn't get to be this powerful by missing meetings. She also didn't get to keep a soul by leaving a child burning. The 2 rules collided and screamed. "Go," Elias said softly. He had always known how powerful people manage time because he cleaned around them while they turned it into money. "Do what you must. I am here." "This is not a choice," Vanessa said. Then she stood and made it one. "We go together," she said to Elias. Or the meeting waits, call the board. Margot answered on the first ring. We have the proof, she said without greeting. Ethan's memo ended up with the exact phrasing in a competitor's press call. You were right to bake the bait into the spine of the sentences. He took a bite. He's sloppy when he's hungry. How much of a fight will it be? Vanessa asked. You could do it with one hand while the other holds a child's hand, Margot said. And if he tries to throw the house into it, we light him up. Vanessa laughed softly, no humor. She tucked the phone away. She looked at Sophie, who was learning the muscle memory of suffering in a world that didn't ask her age before it handed it out. She looked at Elias, who had built a life out of dust and duty and was in danger of losing both. I'll be back by 7, she said to them. Both of you breathe until then. You too, Elias said. She took a black car to a building that glittered like a truth someone wanted you to believe. She walked into a boardroom where the table was the size of some people's apartments. They talked with the chilly clarity of minds sharpened on money, and Vanessa let them. She let them make their case for paranoia. She let Ethan lay down the careful bricks, negligence, optics, irregular visitors, security protocols ignored. He asked, politely, like a man who'd rehearsed, why a janitor was in the CEO living room at midnight. Because joy doesn't check badges, Vanessa said, and because kindness is not a security risk, people are. Then you'll agree to a full sweep of your home, Ethan replied with the pivot of a fencer. I have something better, Vanessa said. She tapped her tablet. The 3 memos flickered onto the wall. The differences were small, the trap not. I gave each of you slightly different details about our deal. Only the version Ethan received appears in our competitor's mouth this morning. Either Ethan gave it to them, or someone with access to his memos did. Ethan's jaw tightened. Not enough for most people to notice it, enough for Vanessa. You're accusing me without evidence, he said, voice smooth as glass. That will look marvelous in litigation. Vanessa's eyes flicked to Margot, who stood and slid a file across the table. We have evidence, Margot said. Metadata, access logs. And a lovely, lovely clip of a phone call you made from your office at 1:12 a.m. Yes, Ethan, your office. The cleaning crew's camera caught the reflection in your window. You really should know your surroundings better. A murmur rolled around the table. It sounded like a weather front deciding to turn. I want to see my counsel, Ethan said, spine stiff with a dignity that had no place to sit. You'll need them, Vanessa said. Security will escort you out. Your email is disabled. You're departing severance, forfeit under Clause 19. You know it. You wrote it. It wasn't just victory. It was relief and rage and the exact measure of grief people feel when minding their own business turns into a sport for someone else to shoot. Ethan stood. He looked at Vanessa across a life's worth of choices. You lost your edge, he said softly. You won this today, but because you softened, this company will. This company, Vanessa interrupted, is why I could afford to build a fence around myself and call it a home. I've learned there's a better way, a longer table. And it's making us more money than our old fear ever did. The difference is I can sleep at night now. Ethan laughed, a thin sound. Sleep, he said. Tell me how that feels in a year. He left. They took a vote of confidence while the city spun on, indifferent and full. It was unanimous. Vanessa's hand didn't tremble. She left the building and went back to the hospital, back to the only thermometer that mattered. Chapter 7, Attic light Sophie had cooled by the time Vanessa returned. The nurse in pink shoes was adjusting her blanket. She rides out fevers like a champion, the nurse said. Some kids are built like that. They're made of fight and flowers. Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed and brushed a curl from Sophie's forehead. I might steal that line, she said. You're the woman from the magazines, the nurse said, not unkind. The one with the glass house. I suppose, Vanessa said. Sometimes the nicest thing you can do for a window, the nurse said as she scribbled on a chart, is open it. The hospital's smell collapsed distance. Vanessa saw an attic with slanted ceilings and a mattress that smelled like sun-warmed cotton. She saw a man with a bucket and a whistle who believed in roofs for more than one head. She saw herself at 5 and herself at 35, the line between them softened by someone else's kindness. When Sophie finally slept, breathing like a soft symphony, Elias sat in the chair and stared at the white linoleum. Do you think we're safe? He asked without looking up. In your house, in your world, in my house, Vanessa said. Yes. She finished the sentence in her head, in my world, I will make it so. They went home when the nurse said they could. Elias carried Sophie, and Vanessa carried a bag full of medicine, and a note from the doctor and a promise she spoke silently to the universe, "Watch me." They put Sophie down in the guest room. The morning light reached across the carpet like the hand of a friend. Vanessa went to her desk. She pulled out the note from the rug and held it like a man holds prayer beads. "A longer table," she said to the empty room, and wrote the words down in ink that would not vanish. The foundation paperwork didn't take long to file. It never does if you're the person people answer when you call. She named it Attic Light, because an attic is where she'd learned that the top of a building is for keeping people safe and a light is what you need to find your way there. Its first grant paid for emergency housing for families like Elias's, those one paycheck away from ruin. The second created a fund in her company's HR department that no one could PR. It was for quiet fixes, the kind that keep a life from falling apart. She called Margot into her office and put the papers on the table. "We'll tie executive compensation to internal kindness metrics," Vanessa said. Margot stared at her as if a unicorn just walked into the room. Then she smiled like maybe she was wrong about the world, but in the nicest possible way. "What are we measuring? Mentorship hours, transfer rates of internal promotions, employee emergency grants, how we treat the most disposable. The numbers that say we're human." "You know this will drive Ethan to drink," Margot said, then caught herself. "It would if he were still here." Vanessa laughed. It didn't come out like a cough this time. Chapter 8, the hardest conversation that evening. The sun put itself to bed gently. Elias sat at the kitchen table, the lamplight turning the edge of his profile soft. He was folding a small shirt he had washed by hand. Some habits outlast poverty. "Tell me about your daughter," Vanessa said. "Tell me about Anais." Elias smiled without showing teeth. "She was the kind of person who would rescue a stray dog on the way to a job interview and then get the job anyway," he said. "She danced in the kitchen. She got sick on a Tuesday. I remember because we always had gumbo on Tuesdays. I thought it was the seasoning. It wasn't. I spent the first 2 months of her diagnosis learning the names of every part of the body she'd never wanted to know." After he checked his breath, it came, he continued. "After she passed, I sold the car and the good dishes. I promised Sophie I'd build us a new house out of air and will. Then the landlord knocked. Turns out the new house needed money. I had lots of will, not enough air." Vanessa touched the note in her pocket. The paper was warm with her body heat. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish I had known." "You know now," he said simply. "Sometimes the only way a wish is useful is if you widen it." He told her about the lullabies Anais had sung, not out of tradition, but because her grandmother had. He told her that the French in their house was a river they dipped their toes into because they wanted to feel a history roll by. "And the song you danced to that night," Vanessa said. "What was it?" "Au clair de la lune," he said. "My mother used to hum it while she ironed. I think she learned it from her father. He learned it from some street somewhere. Traditions are like that. They don't need an origin story to be true." Vanessa nodded, thinking of origin stories, how she had built one out of cold and strategy, how it had carried her until she realized she was in a different place now. "Let me do something," she said suddenly, the decision arriving full-grown. "Not charity, an apology from a world that made you pay for your grief. I bought your former building this morning." Elias stared. "You what?" "I own the debt now," Vanessa said. "There will be no eviction on your record, no noise about missed payments. You'll get a letter saying there was a clerical error. You'll think I waved a wand if you want to. I didn't. I wrote a check. Consider that the beginning, not the end." Elias's mouth trembled. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You're not required to," she replied. "Just stay." He nodded. The only person in the room who would ever understand which "stay" she meant was the child asleep in the other room. Chapter 9. When the house caught fire, they didn't see the trouble coming because sometimes trouble doesn't announce itself with a violin score. It just strikes a match. The fire started small. An old outlet in the West Wing sparked at 3 a.m. The same kind of spark that had listened to lullabies and the clatter of toy blocks and decided it wasn't invited to joy. Flames crept up the wall as shy as thieves. The smoke alarm screamed, a sound that yanked Sophie upright in bed before Elias reached the hallway. Training takes over in these moments. Elias's version of training was love, Vanessa's was control. Both moved fast. Elias scooped Sophie up like a bag of wheat that happened to be his heart. Vanessa grabbed the fire extinguisher from the kitchen cabinet and sprayed with the direct, purposeful violence she'd once kept for competitors. The white chemical snow smothered the fire like a blanket. The flames died. It took 17 minutes to clear the smoke. It took 6 more to sink into the couch in the dark and realize that in the repertoire of disasters a life could hold, they had just pressed shuffle on the playlist, and the next song had been a warning. Sophie stood in the doorway of the lounge, a small bundle in a superhero cape that nobody remembered buying. "We should sleep in one room," she declared with the fierce wisdom of the newly terrified. They did. On the lounge floor, 3 mattresses shoulder to shoulder, because sometimes the simplest solution is to put your bodies next to each other and wait for the sun. Elias hummed the lullaby that didn't care about alarms. Vanessa lay on her back and watched the shadows stripe the ceiling. She counted the breaths of a child and an old man and felt the ledger of her life finally balance. In the morning, a fire inspector with tired eyes scribbled a report, lectured about old wiring in new houses, and left. Vanessa called a contractor and told them to begin work that afternoon. Elias made coffee. Sophie put a bandage on the wall and said there, "All better," with the blind optimism of people who refuse to lose. That afternoon, Vanessa stood in front of her staff in the auditorium on the 4th floor like a conductor before a symphony and told them the truth. "My house caught fire last night," she said, and the room inhaled. "We put it out. We slept together on the floor because sometimes the solution to almost anything is to stop being alone. This company is a house too. We can no longer afford to only spackle the cracks. We fix the wiring. We stop pretending smoke means we should open a window and hope." The room didn't clap. They didn't need to. They stood there and absorbed the electricity of a person telling the truth in public. Chapter 10, the vote that changed more than the minutes. The next board meeting was not about a leak. It was about a vision that made investors sit up and wonder if ethics could make money. They rarely ask that question out loud because the answer terrifies them. Vanessa stood in the room where Ethan had crowed about optics and laid out the attic light partnership. "We tie our growth to our ability to keep our people," she said. "We stop treating loyalty like something you can demand while extracting it like ore. We will fund emergency housing for employees in crisis, no questions asked. We will provide legal aid because poverty with paperwork is still poverty. We will create a pool for childcare grants that doesn't run dry when a fiscal quarter does." "Where is the business case?" an old man with clean fingertips asked. "The business case is that replacing people costs money," Vanessa said evenly. "The human case is that a Fortune 100 company should be capable of behaving like a neighbor. If you need me to put that in a spreadsheet, I will, but I will not pretend the numbers lead. We do." He frowned as if she'd insulted a religion. "And what about our appearance to the market?" "Our appearance," Vanessa said, "will be of a company innovating in a way that nobody else dares to because we forgot that bravery wasn't just for product teams." They voted. It passed, not unanimously, but with enough to count. She didn't need unanimity. She needed momentum. The press asked if she'd gone soft. She replied, "No." I sharpened. Chapter 11. The gift of the rug. She had the rug repaired by a craftswoman who worked with her hands the way some people play the piano, meticulous, affectionate, unafraid of patience. Vanessa asked her to sew the note back into the underside when she was done. "Why hide it?" the woman asked, "if it's what you live by now?" "Because some talismans do their best work when they touch the floor we walk on," Vanessa said. The woman nodded. "Some people don't need long explanations." Sophie watched the repair like a surgeon observing through glass. "Can we put our own note in too?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. "Of course," Vanessa said. They wrote it together. Sophie dictated solemnly. "If you find this, it means love was here." Vanessa added a line beneath it. "And it never left. VL and S." They tucked the second note next to the first under a strand of thread that had learned to carry secrets. Vanessa ran her palm over the rug and felt echo and promise in the fibers. Chapter 12. The invitation summer arrived with its brass band exuberance. The house filled with light and a kind of noise that is the sound of people becoming family without making a ceremony out of it. Vanessa threw a small party, not the kind with donors and photographers, but the kind with potato salad and kids running through sprinklers. She invited staff and their children. The CFO seat sat empty on the lawn. She didn't miss it. At some point between the grilled corn and the second batch of lemonade, Sophie climbed onto a chair, cleared her tiny throat, and shouted, "Everybody listen." The lawn fell silent. Sophie looked at Vanessa and at Elias and then at everyone. She lifted her chin. "This is our house," she declared. It has sleepovers and rugs and fire, but we put the fire out. If you don't have a place, you can come to our house." There was a beat where everyone wondered if this was how they should live now. Then there was laughter and a few tears, and someone clapped. And then everyone did, because sometimes leadership is a child standing on a chair saying the thing the rest of us forgot we knew. Vanessa lifted Sophie from the chair and kissed her temple. "That was brave," she whispered. Sophie considered this. "I learned it from you," she said matter-of-factly, "and Papu." She touched Elias's cheek with a small hand like it had the authority to heal. Elias looked like a man who had built a life out of wreckage and was suddenly living in a cathedral. Chapter 13. The letter she wrote to herself before dawn one morning. Vanessa sat at the long kitchen table and wrote a letter she had never thought she would write. It was to the woman she had been, the one who had used speed and sharpness like armor, the one who had believed that gentleness was the enemy of victory. "Dear Ice," she began, with a half-smile at her own private cruelty, "you did not fail by surviving. You did not err by building yourself a fortress. You forgot one thing: the point of a fortress isn't to keep people out forever. It's to keep the storm off long enough to remember who you are and then to open the gates. You can keep the walls, they'll keep you warm. Just make sure the door swings both ways. Love, Fire." She put the letter in a drawer. She didn't need to reread it to remember it. Chapter 14. The last surprise. People who live inside surprises grow less surprised over time. They expect it when the door swings. But even then, life has a way of arriving through the ceiling. On a rain-draped afternoon, a small box arrived at the house with no return address. Inside, a faded photograph. A man with a mop and a grin, a woman with a tired face, a girl with a borrowed scarf tied like a crown. Vanessa turned the photo over. The back read, in handwriting whose curls she recognized even now, "For the girl who wore the queen's scarf and became one." H. Browsard. She brought the photo to Elias. His fingers shook as he traced the face of his father. There was that grin, the one that had tucked people into an attic and filled the air with whistled notes that meant home. "He kept everything," Elias whispered. "He kept everyone." Vanessa pressed the photograph against her chest, the way a person might hold a relic if they had that kind of faith. "I'll put this in a frame," she said. "Not in a drawer on the wall where it can watch us." Sophie tugged at her sleeve. "That's me," she said, pointing to the small girl in the photo. Vanessa laughed. "In a way, yes." The doorbell rang again. A courier this time, with an envelope that held papers dry as bone. It was from a corporate law firm in a city she didn't envy. Inside was a letter with elegant menace, strong language, non-compete dust, the last attempt of a man who had never taken defeat well. Ethan was suing. Margot called within the hour. "We'll handle it," she said. "He's a man waving a sword in a room we've already left." Vanessa sipped her tea. "Good," she said. "I'm busy." "What are you busy with?" Margot asked, amused and not teasing. "Dinner," Vanessa said. "The child is hungry." Margot laughed. "That's one court you'll never win," she said. "Feed the queen." Chapter 15. The lullaby that night. In the lounge with the repaired rug and the record player that had learned to hum again, Vanessa stood with Sophie in her arms. Elias, a few feet away, watched with a smile that looked like gratitude had decided to retire on his face. "Sing," Sophie demanded. "I don't know the words," Vanessa protested automatically. It was a reflex born of a life where the parts you didn't know could cost you. "Then hum," Sophie said, "like Papu." Vanessa put her lips to the top of Sophie's head and hummed a melody older than her ambition. Elias closed his eyes and joined her, his voice low and steady. The notes braided around the room and climbed the staircase and drifted under doors and out the windows and across the Hudson to where the city held itself upright by virtue of the fact that so many people refused to lie down. She hummed until the child went heavy in her arms. She kept humming a moment more. The house, her house, held them like two hands cupping a flame. She didn't think she would cry. Not here, not now. She did anyway, quietly, without drama, the kind of crying that washes dust from a person and leaves them clear. Elias looked up and chose not to say anything. That was his kindness tonight. Silence, offered like a chair. Vanessa laid Sophie down. She stood at the window and looked at the water and saw two reflections in the glass, the woman who had built an empire and the one who had learned the contentment of a small, warm hand in hers. They were not enemies. They were a duet. Behind her, Elias cleared his throat softly. "Miss Lair," he said. She turned. He never called her Vanessa without a second beat of hesitation. Old habits. Respect that came from the old calculus where money plus management equals distance. You saved us, he said. Vanessa shook her head. We saved each other, she said. You reminded me of the attic. Sophie reminded me of the table. My grandmother left me a note I had the luxury of ignoring for too long. I'm done ignoring. He nodded, satisfied in the way of men who did not need their contribution weighed to believe it had weight. Do you think your father would approve? Vanessa asked, half teasing, half serious. Elias smiled. My father, he said, would say the point of a mop isn't just to clean floors, it's to make space for dancing. Vanessa laughed. Then, because the room had just given her permission, she took Sophie's limp little hand, lifted it gently, and danced with a sleeping child. Elias joined, a small sway that was more respect than rhythm. The record turned. The needle clicked softly like a heartbeat. When she stopped, the house was very quiet. Epilogue, the long table years from now, people will tell different versions of the same story. In some, the billionaire softened and the company suffered. In others, she turned her empire into a pulpit and preached compassion until the stock split like bread. The truth sits somewhere in the soft light over a table where there are more chairs than you'd think a family needed. They will say, there was a night the CEO came home without warning and froze at the sight of a janitor dancing with a child. They will say she let them stay. She let herself stay. That was the real miracle. They will forget the names, or they will remember them. They will not forget the note sewn into the rug, or the photo on the wall, or the way a woman hummed in the dark because she didn't know the words but she knew the tune, and sometimes that is enough. The empire did not fall, it changed shape. The woman did not lose her edge. She learned to carve with it instead of cut. The janitor did not stop cleaning. He cleaned and taught the CEO how to keep house in the way that matters, and the little girl grew. She learned to sleep through storms and to wake for good news. She learned that money can buy a mansion and kindness turns it into a home. She learned to stand on chairs and invite the world in. In a city made of glass and ambition, where the river remembers and the skyline forgets, a house with a repaired rug and a record player that hisses at the last groove holds 3 people and the understanding that changed them. Some fortunes are counted in shares and square feet. The one that matters is measured in how many voices you hear singing when the lights go out. The night Vanessa Lair came home without warning, she froze because she saw love and knew she had been walking around it like an obstacle. Now she walks into it, every day. If you ever find the house, you'll know it by the sound of humming and the way the front door opens before you knock. If you pull up the corner of the rug, you'll feel paper smooth as memory. It will tell you, in letters that traveled through time, what to do when money makes you forget why you started. Build a longer table, and then come sit. There's room.